All right, we'll get started. It's just after 9 o'clock. Really appreciate you joining us this morning. We're going to give a presentation on hurricane preparedness and beach safety. My name is Eric Hayden. I'm a meteorologist with the Weather Service just up the road from you all in Newport off of Roberts Road. A lot of information to cover, a lot of good stuff, some things that you may not have heard of before. It is about an hour-long talk. I know that's a lot of information, so I'm going to try to make this as interesting as we can. Anytime we give a presentation at the Weather Service, I like to talk about who we are, what we can offer you in the community, not just in your job at the community college, but as a citizen of Carteret, Craven County, Onslow, wherever you may be living. So we'll talk a little bit about the Weather Service, but the main part of today's talk is going to be on hurricane preparedness. This is Hurricane Preparedness Week. We're going to give you some tips, whether you've lived in the area for 20 or 30 years. There may be some things that you don't realize, or perhaps you just moved to our area. Toward the end of the talk, I do want to talk about beach safety. There is some overlap with this, especially with regards to rip currents, but we're going to talk about things like longshore current, lightning, water spouts, and things of that nature, since we have proximity to the water in our area. Then at the end, I'm going to turn it over to you for questions and answers. Want to try to make this as interactive as possible. There'll be some poll questions throughout. At any point, you can ask a question. I'll probably take most of those at the end, but I do have the question tab open. David had commented that the audio is good and everything like that. So I am kind of monitoring it. If we've got something that pops up, please ask it. Really appreciate any feedback that you have. If you're wondering, what are these questions he's talking about? I can't see the screen. There's a nice control panel, and if you don't see the full screen version of it, just click on the orange arrow, and that allows you to see the whole control panel. This is how you can type a question to us and also unmute yourself if I ask you a question and you want to talk to me verbally. All of your microphones have been muted initially, so don't worry about background noise. Just kind of sit back and relax and watch the presentation. If you do want to ask a question verbally, just raise your hand. I will see it. I will unmute you. Then you'll have to do the same thing on your end. So it's kind of a double layer of protection, so we don't have to worry about any background noise. So for now, just sit back, watch the presentation. If you've got any questions, you can type it into the question dialogue part, or you can raise your hand and I will call on you. One more housekeeping item. This presentation is being recorded. I'll provide that as a YouTube link, as a private or unlisted link with everybody that signed up today. So if you needed to view it at a later time, you can certainly do that. In addition, in the handout section is a copy of the presentation. So if I went over anything that you think could be useful for somebody in your community, please share this information with them. So with that, we'll get started. I've mentioned off the top, we want to talk a little bit about the Weather Service, who we are. We're part of the federal government. We fall under the Department of Commerce and NOAA. Each dot on this map represents a local forecast office, and the different shadings for the different regional offices, the Northeast, the Southern, Central, and things of that nature. Our main job is the protection of life and property. I'm going to show you that we issue a lot of specialized forecasts. The one that you're most familiar with probably is the 7-day forecast, but what you probably know us most for is issuing watches, warnings, and advisories. So you may see them on your phone, you may see them scroll across your TV, you may get an alert on the radio. That is issued by your local forecast office. As far as we're concerned, we are down the road from you in Newport, again off of Roberts Road. We are responsible for the whole area shaded in yellow. So roughly the eastern quarter of North Carolina, places like Jacksonville and Greenville, all of the Outer Banks, and certainly the Crystal Coast. You'll notice that yellow shading area does go out into the water, and this is out to 20 nautical miles. So if you've ever been on a boat, been on the ferry, been to the beach, we do a marine forecast and also a beach forecast for those locations and issue warnings. So we cover not just land-based areas, but also the surrounding water. You'll notice that there's no shading in central or northern North Carolina. Doesn't mean those folks aren't covered. They're covered by the Raleigh, Wilmington, or Richmond office up in Virginia. So again, about 100, just over 100 offices in the country, each sectored out so that we know our local area. And that's a good thing to have, because With technology, I could forecast from Nebraska, but if I've never been to the beach, if I don't get those phone calls asking about what is the wave height because I want to go out to Big Rock and go fishing, those types of things, you're not going to learn unless you live in the community and you work in it. So that's one reason why we have the local offices spread out. The biggest downside to being a meteorologist, other than being teased that you get it wrong all the time and people teasing you about the forecast, is the work hours. No matter what, if you're watching Jerry Jackson, Donnie Cox, any of the local meteorologists, to the Weather Channel, to our local office, we have some type of odd hour that we work. So in the Weather Service, we work 24/7. If you come to our building, Christmas Eve, during Florence, no matter what is happening, there's always at least 2 of us at the office covering the weather. And we work in rotating shifts, much like police and fire and first responders. We'll have a day shift, roughly 8 to 4, an evening shift, which is 2 to 11, and then my least favorite shift, the overnight shift, either 10 or 11 at night until 7 or 8 in the morning. And our staffing will vary. We usually have about low 20s in terms of staffing, mostly forecasters. We do have some support staff to make sure that we get paid, to make sure the lights are on, the computers work, and the weather equipment works as well. But if you come visit us during a storm, this is an example of Hurricane Florence, we're fully staffed. So we stay there, we sleep there, and we work through the storm itself. I don't have a picture on this presentation, but we are a reinforced brick building. We're located up high and we have hurricane shutters. So again, we stay there during the storms. If we needed a backup because of any issues with our own safety, we have a storm shelter in the building and we have surrounding offices in Wilmington and the Richmond office that can back us up. So that's a little bit about the Weather Service. Again, open 24/7. Main mission is protection of life and property. The best way to get weather information from us is our website. It's outstanding. There is a ton of information on here. You want to bookmark it today. The big advantage is you've paid for it. I mentioned that we work for the federal government. Your tax money pays for this website. There's no advertisement on it. It's straight weather information. The downside of the website is there's a ton of weather information. So you want to kind of enter your city or zip code when you get to the page. Bookmark that, whether it's saving it to your home screen on your mobile device or your home computer, and then play around with it a little bit. There's a lot of features on the website. The easiest one, after you enter your city or zip code, you can get a detailed forecast, either text-based or icon-based. I'm a big gardener, so I like the text one because it'll show you how much rain is expected. Like we expect a 1/4 to 1/2 inch tomorrow. We certainly need that rain and things of that nature. So it can be as basic as you want, or if you scroll down the page, there's a lot of other features that we offer for the forecast. One of them is a marine forecast. So if you've ever been on a boat or do any type of boating, you are much more vulnerable to weather because you're away from your house, you're out on the water, you're more susceptible to wind, lightning, temperature differences, wind shifts. So we do a forecast for that. It's out to 5 days. And I mentioned that we cover out to 20 nautical miles into the ocean, in addition to the local sounds and rivers. So anything like winds, wave height, is it going to rain, any obstructions to visibility like fog. And we update this every 3 hours. It's available as a text forecast. You can also call us at the office, and you can also get it on the weather radio. And we have a graphical version on the site itself. So again, kind of fool around with the website and get it the way that you want in terms of a forecast. We offer aviation forecast. You might say, well, Eric, I'm not a pilot, but if you've ever flown, they use a Weather Service forecast. They're not as concerned with temperatures. They're more concerned with the height of the cloud. Is there a reduction in visibility because of snow, rain, thunderstorms, fog, that type of thing. We do this standardized 4 times a day. And our local airports get this. So if you've flown out of New Bern, Jacksonville, Greenville, Kinston, those locations, and now it's a graphical based forecast. Let's say a helicopter has to land, heaven forbid there's an accident and they need the helicopter to land and take someone to get some first aid at a hospital. They will use this graphical forecast so they know what is expected in terms of aviation concerns. We also do a fire weather forecast. The whole point of this, again, you're probably not using the fire weather forecast or the aviation, but what I want you to get out of this is, yes, we do a 7-day forecast to tell you what to wear. Is it going to rain? How hot is it going to be this weekend? But behind the scenes, we're doing a lot of special forecasts that you don't see on the local TV station, and it's usually unique to the Weather Service. As far as the fire weather forecast goes, we do this twice a day, no matter what, through the whole season. But specifically during the late winter and early spring, if you've lived around here any amount of time, especially if you live near the Croatan, you might see these big plumes of smoke. A lot of times they're what's called a controlled burn or prescribed burn. And what that is they burn parts of the forest, especially the lower part, any brush and things of that nature, so that that's gone. If we were to ever have a forest fire, there would not be as much fuel left for it. And they want windy days and dry days so the fire gets going, but they don't want it so windy that it gets out of control. And they want certain wind directions so that the smoke blows more toward rural areas instead of a big city like Morehead City. So in those cases, we can do a specialized spot forecast where we give specifics for a specific point and location. If there's a fire, we've had some of those the last couple of weeks because we've been so dry, we can also do a specialized forecast for that type of information. One last place you can get information is social media. I mentioned our website is great. You can even get hour by hour forecast. You can see what time the wind speed is going to change. Last night, we were watching the wind shift as some cooler air comes in. You can get all of that on our website. Social media, we kind of condense it down to what we think is most important. So we're on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Just search NWS Morehead City. If you want to cut through the noise, what should I focus on? That's what we use social media for. Facebook and Twitter, we also use it to advertise upcoming classes. We're teaching a class very similar to this tonight for the whole community, so we use it as that platform. On YouTube, we post videos when we have any type of tropical system, winter storm, severe weather. They may be 5 to 10 minutes long, but if you want really in-depth information for our local area from us just down the street, that's what we put on YouTube. This is a tweet that we sent out during Florence. This is kind of our transition in the talk. We're going to talk now more about hurricane preparedness. We really wanted people to not focus on the category of the storm, really with any storm, but with Florence, you'll remember it was a 4 and it went down to a 1 in terms of just wind speed, but none of the other impacts were going to change, flooding, storm surge. So we really wanted people not to let their guard down, even though the category was lowering. Since this is a virtual talk and you're not out at the office, I kind of want to give you a brief tour. Then we'll go over to the actual hurricane preparedness and beach safety. When we get back to whatever normal is, this is your office. You're welcome to take a tour. We set those up in advance. We do school groups, church groups, work groups, students interested in meteorology. Anybody's welcome to take a tour. Again, once we get back to whatever normal is, and we just schedule that ahead of time, you'll have my email at the end of this presentation. I'm pretty easy to find, so if you ever want to set that up down the road, don't forget about it. Use us as a resource in the community. This is what our office looks like on the outside. A lot of you that drive down Roberts Road may see the soccer ball. That is the Doppler radar. It's a giant dome on top of the tower. We'll talk about that in a second. This building here is where we launch weather balloons from, and as I mentioned, we are open 24/7. One of the most fun aspects of my job is doing a weather balloon launch. About 3/4 of the offices do this in the country, not all of them. It's about $200, $150 to $200 per launch. That includes the gas. We generate our own hydrogen, but some offices use helium. That includes the balloon itself. And this white package here is what's called a radiosonde. That is the instrumentation. Measures things like temperature, humidity, and pressure. It doesn't have an anemometer on it to measure wind speed, but we GPS track it, and based on where it moves and how fast it moves, we can determine the wind speed and direction. We launch these every day. pretty much no matter what, even in the middle of Florence. We have an hour-and-a-half window to do it. So if there's lightning, we'll wait. Otherwise, we go ahead and launch it. This time of year, it's launched at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Usually start prepping the balloon around, about 45 minutes prior to. Takes about 20-25 minutes to fill up the balloon. We test the instruments. We don't want to send them up into the sky and have them not reporting accurate information. The balloon takes about an hour-and-a-half to complete its mission. It goes all the way up to about 100 to 110,000 feet. On the way up, it's collecting the data. It pops and it returns to the Earth via this parachute. Very, very important information. You might say, why are you still doing this in 2021? All of that information goes into our weather models, so it helps day-to-day forecasting, but we can also see severe weather parameters. Is it going to snow or rain? Just a lot of really useful information, because again, the weather's coming from above us. A lot of our measurements are down here at ground level, but what is actually happening is upstairs in the clouds. So we need to do those types of measurements. Another thing we use is the Doppler radar. I mentioned this looks like a giant soccer ball, but what it is on the inside is actually a huge satellite dish that rotates around, sends out a beam of radiation up into the sky. And if any radiation comes back, it bounces off, and we can detect that. It's things like rain or snow, hail, even insects and birds, we can see that. And then because of the Doppler effect, we can measure winds blowing toward and away from the radar site. It's a change in frequency. You've noticed it if you hear a train. We've got the train that goes through Morehead City now and then. The pitch is different as the train approaches you to when the train is actually going away. So because of that Doppler effect, we can measure things going toward and away from the radar site. It may not necessarily mean a tornado, but if we have strong rotation in a thunderstorm, that's where we would issue a warning based on the science. So we started small. We mentioned weather balloons. We also take measurements at the office. Radar can be, a couple hours around. We can see up toward Raleigh, and we can use the Raleigh radar and Wilmington radar to fill in the gaps. Much, much, much bigger are weather satellites. They're 22,000 miles up in the sky. They're looking down on the Earth. In this example, anything white is indicating clouds, anything clear indicating sunny skies. And these help us show what's going on with the weather many, many days away from us. So think about Florence, 5 to 7 days, we were talking about this storm way out in the ocean. Before satellites, you wouldn't know a storm was hitting until the seas picked up, the clouds started to thicken up, that type of thing. So weather satellites really improved forecasting. And a couple of years ago, we upgraded the GO 16 and 17 satellite. So it's really going from black and white TV to high def. We would have 15 or 30-minute updates down to 5, a lot of higher resolution. And then if a certain sector is placed over us because we think the weather's going to be bad, we can have updates as frequently as just a few minutes. So very, very impressive technology. So we're about at the 9:20 mark. I don't want to put anybody to sleep. We talked about the Weather Service, protection of life and property, a brief tour, and you can find some of that information, including a balloon launch. If you want to see it now, since you can't tour in person, just go to YouTube, search NWS Morehead City, and we have a lot of interactive videos on there. So speaking of interaction, now the next part of the talk, about 25-30 minutes, is going to focus on hurricane preparedness. That's the main crux of this talk. But I want to give you a poll question to make sure everybody's still with us. And this is talking about hurricane season. So my question for you, you'll see the poll come on up, and you'll see the question, have you done anything to prepare for hurricane season? So we'll give it about 30 seconds. And yes or no, pretty easy question. Have you done anything yet for hurricane season? So I like the honesty. It looks like we have almost a 50-50 split. We'll give it another 10 seconds. I appreciate you voting. We have about 80% of you have voted. So I appreciate you paying attention and staying with us. So I'll show the results. So you can see that a pretty even split between yes, I prepared, and no, I have not. For the first year in a while, I have already started to prepare myself. I'm trying to practice what I preach. So I was at the store the other day, saw the big stockpile of water. So instead of waiting, like what we've had issues here recently with gas, instead of waiting until the issue is here, I've got some water in the house. So I'm trying to practice what I preach. This is Hurricane Awareness Week or Preparedness Week. A lot of times it's human nature. Half of us roughly said no, we haven't. I'm usually in that category. I maybe have a little bit of advance notice. I'll say, hey, to my wife and kids, we better start, packing stuff up and things of that nature. But I've changed my philosophy to try to spread it out. A lot of us have been hit with some financial times over the last year, and you might not be able to go out and spend a couple $100s on food and water all at once. So each time you go to the store over the next couple weeks, just get a couple items, and then you won't notice it on your bill quite as much. I've got 3 younger kids. We usually eat through our hurricane kit of non-perishables and cookies and snacks and water and that kind of stuff, especially late fall into winter. So then that way I'll replenish it in the spring. Because again, you want to restock that stuff. You don't want to keep it forever, especially water and some things that don't have as long of a shelf life as something like a canned good. So just try to take little steps. And if you've lived here before, you all know it. And even if you haven't, maybe you've moved from the north and you have winter storms. The couple days before a storm, you might not be able to get those supplies. So we're going to talk about that here coming up, and just kind of a little, about half of us haven't done it yet. So just maybe this weekend when you go to the store, put at least a couple canned goods in there or some water just to kind of get yourself started. The reason why we say the time to prepare is now is hurricane season. While it officially starts June 1st, last year we had Tropical Storm Arthur in May. Every couple of years we do get some storms in the month of May. This graph shows when the peak of the season is roughly about September 10th. The red is hurricanes and tropical storms, and the yellow is hurricanes. So we tend to get our worst storms about the peak, Dorian, last year Isaias, and then we had Florence, of course. But we tend to be equal opportunity here in North Carolina, where we get storms throughout the season. So we really encourage people to start preparing in May. Don't wait for the official start January 1st. And know on the back end, when I first moved here, I remember, I don't know if it might have been the year Florence happened. We got into August and there just wasn't a lot of storms. And somebody remarked, hey, it looks like we're going to get through hurricane season. The thing I want you to get out of this graphic, or the two things are, it can start as early as May, and the peak is not until mid-September. So even if we get all the way through the summer and we're all back to school in the fall, and we think, oh, we got off easy this year, remember that, after the peak or near it was Florence, and then into October was Matthew and Sandy. So the season is long, and remember that as we get into the second half of summer. A good way to prepare is to use our website. You might say, hey, I'm new to the area, or what should I be doing? On our website, weather.gov/Morehead City, just put a /hurricane prep. Again, you've got a copy of this presentation in your in the handout section of this webinar, so you can download this. A lot of good information, hurricane kits, evacuation routes, storm surge, what can you expect with the different impacts of a tropical cyclone. So a lot of good information. As far as the basic one, food, water, and medicine, the standard has always been 3 days, and that's a good start. But if you were here a couple of years ago in Florence, some of us didn't have power for 5 to 7 days, especially down East Carteret County. So 3 days is a good start, but we like to say 7 just to be really prepared, so that you're not having to go out and get gas and water and those types of things, because they are going to be limited during the storm itself. This is a good time to mention that we do offer briefings on our website that you can see. We mentioned this before with regards to social media. We disseminate a lot of information. But on our website itself, if there's a hurricane and you go to weather.gov/Morehead City, on the bottom of the page, there's a lot of icons: winter weather, marine forecast, beach, surf forecast. But there's one called weather hazard briefing. This is an example slide from Tropical Storm Arthur. Again, that was last May 17th, so less than a week from now. And this shows you all the graphics that you can expect to prepare for the storm. And we'll talk a lot about things you should do to prepare and what to expect from this particular storm. I already mentioned off the top on our generic overview, social media. You'll also find a lot of good information on that. Just search NWS Morehead City, and depending on the platform, you'll get videos or infographics, hurricane maps, and things of that nature. So there's a lot of information on the internet. The point of this slide is to focus on official sources of information. There's a lot of Facebook sites that have popped up and talk about storms well down the road, and sometimes it's an early heads up, and sometimes nothing happens at all. And you might see these types of graphics. We call these spaghetti models. When they're in the hands of a professional, they're very useful. They show multiple iterations of a model. It'll be slightly changed and to see what could potentially happen. When they're spread out like this, that's not good model agreement. When they're closely clustered like it is here early in this model run, that's very high confidence because they all show the same thing. So they do offer some value if you know how to use it. The problem is, let's say you live in northern Florida and you see this one model going over your way. You think you might get a storm when in reality, that's an outlier in terms of the guidance. So they're fun to look at, they're interesting, but please, if you're making your decisions, focus on the official forecast from the men and women at the Hurricane Center. 175 years of experience, and I think you have seen over the last couple of years that track forecasting has become much more accurate over the last couple of years. So to back it up with some facts, this is a compare contrast the year 2019 to 1999. How far have we come since Hurricane Floyd? What you're looking at is back in 1999, the average error with a hurricane forecast, so in this case, Hurricane Floyd was 99, was a couple hundred miles. And so if we were to issue a forecast back in 1999, 3 days out before Floyd was hitting, we would say that the storm could hit anywhere, the center of the storm, from Southern Virginia through North Carolina, South Carolina, even Georgia. So wide area. The science wasn't quite there yet for accuracy. Contrast that with Dorian in 2019, our average area would be somewhere over southeast North Carolina, specifically the Wilmington area. So a lot of improvement has occurred over the last 20 to 30 years with regards to hurricane forecasting. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that with regards to the forecast cone that you're certainly familiar with. But the whole point is trust official sources. The accuracy has continued to improve. So please look at that information when you're making decisions. One area we still need to improve on, and it is scary, is the fact that we're not very good at forecast intensity changes. For example, Hurricane Florence went from a 4 category to a 1, which we were thankful for, but it's hard to make those predictions, and it can easily go the other way. So imagine that we have a 1 or 2 heading our way, and I'm going to tell you not to focus on the category here in a couple slides coming up, but let's say it increases rapidly at onset. So just know that while our accuracy of predictions in terms of the track has increased, the intensity forecasting is still difficult. So our nation's 3 most powerful, or some of our most powerful storms 3 days out, the Labor Day storm back in the 1930s, Hurricane Andrew and Camille, they were all just tropical storms 3 days out. So they had rapid intensification. So just letting you know, when we have an approaching storm, plan for usually a category worse or worse than what the official forecast is, because that can happen sometimes. So we already mentioned this. Make your plan today. Is your kit ready? And that website above will give you some information on that. So now I want to go through a couple of the products that the Hurricane Center issues. Ones you're probably familiar with, and then ones like these you may not have heard of that can kind of give you a heads up for storms headed our way. Any of this information is on the Hurricane Center website. Easiest way to remember this is hurricanes.gov. This is called the Tropical Weather Outlook. This is issued to give a heads up 4 times a day, potential activity over the next 5 days. So it will show current storms like this symbol here. This is an old graphic, and it will show probability. So the yellow area is low, the orange area is medium chance, and if there was a red area, that was high. And this shows the potential area that that storm could develop. This used to come out June 1st. This will come out May 15th, so just a couple of days from now, because storms have gotten a little earlier. So we want to make sure to give folks a heads up for that. That tropical outlook is a good heads up before this. Once the storm gets a name or is likely to be named, or is a concern and gets a path, it will show up in the outlook. So if you want to know about something, 10 days in advance, well out into the ocean, that outlook is your thing you want to look at. Now, everybody is probably familiar with this. This is a forecast cone. A couple things about this. I mentioned that our accuracy is improving. So that cone is getting more narrow and more narrow, and it's not storm dependent. It's all based on science, and it's based on the last 5 years of error. So, for example, on this cone here, the hurricane center, the dot represents where that center of the storm is, and then the width of the cone is determined by the error at 24 hours, 12 hours, 72, all the way out to 5 days. So it has continued to get more narrow because statistically our error for the center of the storm has gotten smaller. So keep that in mind. It does not represent who will be impacted and who won't. It's not storm based. It's just based on where we think the storm center will go. So 2/3 of the time, the center of the storm will go in the path of what we draw. 1/3 of the time, we're going to be wrong. So the point of this graphic is, don't focus too much on the cone and use it as I'm in the risk area or I'm not. So for example, when you look at this cone, and this is a graphic from Florence, if you're in Georgia or South Carolina or even up toward New Jersey during this, you don't want to say, hey, I'm out, I don't have to worry about it, because 1/3 of the time we're going to be wrong. And even if we're right, a hurricane is not a point. So let's just say it goes right down the middle of this graph. Hurricanes can extend hundreds and hundreds of miles across. So this orange circle here shows the wind field for Florence at this time, and you can see it extends well beyond the path itself. So the important thing is, this shows the most probable path for just the center. It does not show how widespread the impacts will be. So even if you're outside of the path, don't think, hey, it's not going to impact me. And it does say nothing about the impacts. This map doesn't show how much rain's going to fall, how the storm surge is, or anything like that. So the forecast cone is a useful tool just to know, am I in or near the general area of concern. This graphic you might not be as familiar with. You can find it on the Hurricane Center website. It does mention this on the website itself, and this is also in our briefings as well. Hurricanes.gov, this is the earliest reasonable time frame of winds. So this is when you should prepare, have all your preparations done. By this time you'll be okay. So in this example, this is with Florence. We expected that the earliest the strong winds could get here sometime Wednesday night into Thursday morning. So this is a worst case scenario. It divides a window when, if you're done by that time, you should be okay completing your evacuation, completing your plans of that nature. A follow-up to that graphic is the most likely time. This is when we think the winds will actually reach tropical storm force. This is an example from Arthur last year. And again, Arthur brushed our coast. So this is showing an example out into the ocean. This is when we actually expect our winds to get above 34 knots or higher. All right, so we talked about the hurricane outlook. Don't focus too much on just the forecast cone. I know it shows kind of a general area where just the center will go. And we mentioned hurricanes.gov, the Hurricane Center website, for some good information. One major point of this presentation is going to be, do not focus on just this. This is the category scale for hurricanes. And how many times have you heard, I'm not going to evacuate unless it's a 3 or a 4. So to kind of back that point up, I want to ask another poll question, and I want to ask you, what do you think kills the most people in a hurricane or tropical storm. I grouped water together. So is it flooding and storm surge? Tornadoes, we certainly had that with Dorian on Emerald Isle, and a lot of tornadoes with Florence. Or is it wind? Category 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, shows our wind. What do you think kills the most? And I can tell we have a sharp audience. I'll give it about another 10 seconds. All right, I'll close the poll, and most of you got it right. I had a couple say tornadoes and wind, and there certainly can be deadly, but by far, water is responsible for killing the most people. So I'm going to talk about the Saffir-Simpson scale and why you shouldn't focus on just that. And what I mean by that is it's an important scale, but it's only wind related. So it doesn't show anything about storm surge or rain, the biggest killers of a tropical cyclone. It only is related to wind. So if we have a 3 or 4, obviously that's to be respected because those are really, really strong winds. But too often we hear, I'm not going to leave unless it's a 3. I'm not going to leave unless it's a 4. Know that no two storms are alike, and it's all of the impacts that can impact us from a storm that are to be taken serious, not just the wind itself. And it really is about those impacts. To back that up, since 2010, we've had 175 direct deaths and over $100 billion in damage for just Category 1 storms. So don't, category is something to pay attention to. I would never say ignore it, but focus on all of the impacts. I specifically put rainfall and storm surge first because, again, that is what kills the most people. Rip currents is up there, and then wind and tornadoes at the bottom, but still something to pay attention to. So we're going to go through each impact and talk a little bit about it, how it relates to us locally. We mentioned, we gave you that poll question, and just to show you the answer in statistics, 1963 to 2012, about half of our deaths in cyclones were storm surge. About a third was rain. When you factor in water, surf conditions, that's about 90%. And wind and tornado, 8 and 3 respectively. So it doesn't mean a tree can't fall on a house. It doesn't mean that wind and tornadoes can't kill, but by far it's water that is killing people. You might say, well, Eric, that graphic's kind of old. The last couple years, 83% is water related. We have made some improvements. Most of this is inland flooding, and only 4% has been storm surge. So we have made improvements with the messaging of how bad storm surge is. We still need to increase the messaging on vehicles. Most people that die in water, not just tropical cyclones, but any type of water-related death is in vehicle. In fact, more than half of the deaths are vehicle-related because people cross areas that they shouldn't. They go around barricades, and we did see that, unfortunately, with some of our deaths during Florence. So to reiterate the point, please help us with this messaging on vehicle-related deaths. We can't get much better with the forecast on Florence. The intensity, yes, it decreased a lot, but the rainfall forecast was as spot on as you're going to get. This is a 5-day forecast from the Weather Service. The pink shading, 25, I think this is 35, this other purple shading. So extremely heavy rain was predicted. Anywhere in yellow is more than 15 inches of rain was expected over southeast North Carolina. That's the graph on the left. The graph on the right is what happened. So again, we're not going to do much better from a forecast standpoint. Where we need to improve, and that's where we need you to help us, messaging. That new neighbor, the new coworker that moved down from Ohio, let them know this information. 16 of our 17 deaths were in vehicles. Those are preventable. It's not the water comes up and people aren't, they're caught off guard. They're going places they shouldn't, or in some cases, they're driving through water they shouldn't, or they don't realize how bad it is. This is an example near Hookerton and Matthew, a water crossing the road. You can see the barricade behind it. What you don't see is after the flood, when we surveyed, you can see that the road is scoured out. So you may think, you know that water is very powerful, so not only can it carry you away, But at night or when water covers a road, you don't know how deep it is because that road might not even exist anymore. So please help us spread the message of turn around, don't drown. Look at the improvements we made with storm surge loss of life. Let's get that message out about cars. It's not just a hurricane thing, but anytime we have flooding rains, do not drive around barricades, do not cross flooded roads. We do issue products to convey this information. The ones you're probably associated with, flash flood watches. But if we upgrade to an emergency, you will get that on your phone. And that means that's a pretty rare situation. We usually only issue these during tropical cyclones or something that, 10, 15 inches of rain, something that just doesn't happen every type of year. So we talked about flooding. The other water-related aspect I want to talk about is storm surge. This is an example of the storm surge flooding from Florence on New Bern in 2018. On the lower left is a video from Ocracoke. Extreme water rises, 4 to 7 feet in a matter of minutes on the backside of Hurricane Dorian. So this can happen in our area and has happened in our area. We had over 1,800 water rescues in New Bern. The example of New Bern shows if you live along any low-lying area near the water, and again, we're talking, influences off the sounds or the ocean. So up any of the Neuse River, any of the tributaries on that, if you live in a low-lying area where water has risen before, you're at risk for storm surge, not just if you're in Emerald Isle or Atlantic Beach. We had a northeast wind that funneled all the water up the Neuse River up to New Bern. It happened with Irene, not as bad, but it certainly can happen even if you're not on oceanfront property. To get that message out, we issue storm surge watches and warnings. For storm surge greater than 3 feet, it's considered life-threatening. You may have seen images like these. These are released when we get closer to the event itself, and it shows the potential storm surge. This is a 10% chance, a worst case scenario. Not everyone will see these exact values. These are used to make evacuation determinations with the local official and show how bad it could get. So luckily not every single area will see these amounts, but again, it's the worst case scenario, and in that case it happened up in New Bern, and in other areas maybe not as much depending on the wind direction. So this is a storm surge map, and you can zoom in to see how high the possible storm surge could get. Starting last year and continuing this year to kind of give it a broader reach, those maps I just showed you are more zooming in. Hey, I live on a tidal creek, I need to know. This is more, for the media and social media to give you, 4 to 6 feet, generally speaking, in these areas, and then you can dive down into those inundation maps and see that. All of this is in our briefing. That inundation map I showed you is on our website. That is for you to use. So if we have a storm, all of this information is pushed out there. If you don't know how to get it, the website is the best place to start, and then we do a lot of promotion on social media to make sure folks in the community are getting that message. So we're almost wrapped up the hurricane preparedness part. It's about 9:45. We're going to do a couple minutes of beach safety, and then I'll turn it over to you. So please, ask questions in the chat if you've got them. If you've got any concerns or anything, just let us know in the chat. You might think rip currents and hurricanes, who is swimming in the water during Florence or Dorian? Other than the surfers that like to get the big waves ahead of it, what I want to talk about here is sunny day rip current issues from distant storms or approaching storms. In 2019, you might not have heard of Hurricane Lorenzo, but it was the strongest, most northernmost Category 5 on record of the Atlantic Ocean, and it passed more than 2,000 miles away from our coastline. But we had 8 deaths up and down the East Coast and 4 in North Carolina alone. These storms generate a lot of energy, and as those swells reach our shores, they can produce rip currents. So ahead of storms or after storms, it might be a beautiful day, but if the red flags are flying and you hear about the high risk for rip currents, you got to stay out of the water. We're going to talk more about rip current safety in the beach safety section, but this is why we include rip current messaging in our hurricane briefings. So again, this summer, this fall, if we expect a storm 5-6 days from now, and it's a real nice day and there's already a high risk for rip currents, please help us get that message out, because you know, think about it. You're down at the beach. It's 85 degrees. It's a beautiful beach day. That hurricane's not going to hit for another 5 days. You're going to think the water's safe. And in some cases, it's not obvious with, you know, real big waves. You only need a couple foot wave. It's the swell energy that can really cause issues with rip currents from those distant storms. We really try to use Facebook and Twitter to get this message out. You can see this was shared over 200 times. And then we try to put all the beaches on there because people know the beach names, you know, pretty well when they're vacationing. So we try to, you know, get that information out on a graphic. So we talked about flooding. We talked about storm surge and rip currents. That is the most in terms of deaths. Wind and tornadoes still a risk. You can have the disruption to power, blocked ways to get out. In our case, again, some of us were up to a week without power. This is a picture near where I live, on the western part of the county. You can see an extensive roof damage. The wind speeds with Florence were impressive, but it was the duration. Very, very strong winds for multiple days. And then we had all that rain. So if you had any issues with your house, even if you didn't have river or ocean flooding, you may have had issues with regard to water penetrating the roof that was no longer there. So wind is important. But one more final point, not to just focus on the category. I just want to give you another example. This is Hurricane Arthur. This was back in 2014. Category 2 storm, similar landfall, but it was a fast-moving storm near Cape Lookout, and it was a compact storm. So there was some issues on the Outer Banks. You can see winds above 80, almost 100 miles per hour in the southern part of the Sound. But here in Carteret County specific, especially toward the western end of the county, to the left of the impact, not really that big of a deal. And again, it's a category 2 storm. So do you remember Arthur? Think about that. Do you remember Irene? I know not all of us were here 10 years ago, but Irene was just a category 1 storm. But you probably remember it if you lived here. Similar landfall, no trick, but it was a larger storm and it was slow moving. So much larger wind field. Most of us saw tropical storm to hurricane force winds. And then we also had some very, very heavy rainfall across inland areas. So that's just to reiterate the point. Pay attention to the category. Do not let that be your only focus. Every storm is different. And depending on where it hits, especially, you know, Florence hit to our left, so we were on that right side of the storm. That's what made it so devastating for our area. Last hurricane or tropical cyclone threat I want to talk about are tornadoes. Specifically, I want to talk about how the outer bands of these storms can produce tornadoes early. So while the landfall of Dorian was not until later that night into the next morning, we had an EF2 in Emerald Isle from those first outer bands that moved into our area. In addition, while a lot of us may see some wind damage, they can produce enhanced areas of damage during the storm. And during Florence, we certainly had a lot of tornadoes. A lot of folks think tornadoes move through when in reality, it was just Florence. But we couldn't get out to survey everyone. Even here in Carteret County, my own neighborhood, people swear a tornado went through, but and it may have, but what's important to remember is we also had 80 to 100 mile per hour winds. And that's going to cause a lot of damage. Tornado damage is going to be more isolated and even more higher end. You can see that tornadoes were found even all the way up to Richmond. In total, 44 with Florence. So not all landfalling systems will have that many, but that is certainly a lot to contend with. So we are on the home stretch. I'm going to ask this question before you see the answer. And then I'm going to turn it over to you. So we'll be right in tune with about the hour mark that we were aiming for this presentation. So how do you get out of a rip current? Is it, I just try to simplify it, is it swim back towards shore against the rip current? Or is it swim parallel to the shore? So I'll give that just about 20 seconds because it seems like most of you know this answer. All right, this is good. This makes me happy. So the homework is on you. You know how to get out of a rip current. Share it with friends and family that are new to the area. More than half our deaths are outside of the Carolinas. So it's not to pick on people from Ohio and Pennsylvania and upstate New York, but they come here, you know, for beach vacation. They're not as used to the ocean, and Rip currents often are in this area that looks calm, or it's where the waves are not breaking because it's a break in the sandbar. So to the person that doesn't go to the beach all the time, even experts, sometimes it's hard to spot where is safe and not safe. So try to swim at a beach with a lifeguard. They'll tell you where to swim, where it's safe. Pay attention to the flags. If it's a red flag, high risk day, just get into the water just up to your ankles. Don't go out in the water. Make sure anytime somebody's in the water, especially children, but even adults, they have supervision, eyes on them, and you're watching them. If they need help, don't become a victim. Often it's the person that goes out to help them is the victim in a drowning and not the person initially needing help. We want to help people. We're a caring society. It's better, however, to try to get a lifeguard if you can, call 911, throw them something that floats so they can stay afloat, or direct them. You all answered it correctly, swim parallel. So in this example, very, very narrow current, 25, 50, 75 feet wide. If you try to come back against it, you're fighting against the current. But if you just go left or right, swim parallel, however you want to think about it, once you're out, you can easily come back in. These have been around for a long time. Surfers use them as a little conveyor belt to get out to the waves. They ride the wave in, and then they take it back out. So they've been around, but please help us with this messaging, especially for new folks to the area. So I'm gonna go through the next couple fairly quick because I know we're coming up on our time. Lightning, a big beach safety hazard. More than 400 people are struck annually, and it kills about 50 per year. North Carolina is usually in the top 5 for lightning statistics. Our big campaign with that is when thunder roars, go indoors. The issue with lightning is as it strikes, it doesn't just hit you or whoever it hits, it spreads out. So if you're in large groups, one of you gets hit, multiple people can get hit. This is at a golf course, and you can see the strike emanating in many, many different directions. You can actually see what the bolts look like on the ground. Pretty fascinating stuff for sure. So the big thing is there's really no safe place outside. So at the beach, you're not safe under a canopy or a tent. You really want to get indoors. Anything inside is better than being out at the beach. If you don't have a beach house, go to your car. A car is a safe place from specifically just lightning because it has a metal cage around it, and because of the Faraday effect, if lightning were to hit, it's not the rubber tires, it's the metal cage around it that will protect it. Once you're inside, I know we don't have a lot of corded things, but if you're on your Android or your iPhone and it's plugged in, you're at risk. Taking showers, stuff like that, it's not a myth. It's rare for that to happen, but if lightning hits, we've had, even in my own neighborhood, hit things outside and come in on the power lines themselves, the electrical lines. So don't be on anything that is plugged in. Out on the boat, you're certainly more at risk. So you're going to need to watch the forecast and listen to the weather. You're going to need to be more proactive. If you're on the beach, you see the skies darkening, you hear the thunder, a minute or two, you can hop in your car up by the parking area. You can run into your beach house. Not that big of a deal. Out on a boat, you don't have as much time to react. So you need to pay attention to the forecast. Are thunderstorms in the forecast? Is the chance really high? Maybe I shouldn't even go out. Or are thunderstorms in the forecast? Okay, I'm going to be watching. Are the clouds growing in height? Now they're starting to turn dark. Okay, maybe I should get a little closer to shore. Okay, I hear thunder. I need to get to shore because you are at risk from being struck by lightning. Water spouts are tornadoes on water. We can get those in our area. Usually they don't have super strong winds. It's not going to like we would have with a land-based tornado, but you're more vulnerable on the beach. They can certainly pick up objects like beach umbrellas, and that's a dangerous thing to be flying around. And they certainly can be dangerous on the water. If you're out on the water, you want to head to shore, or if you can't, you want to head at a 90-degree angle away from the apparent motion. And sometimes they're nearly stationary and it's kind of hard to tell. You certainly want to keep your distance from those. And we get them, and they're not just from thunderstorms or, we gave a hurricane talk. They can be on days where we just have rain showers across the area. Last two tips are with regards to tornadoes, since we were talking about it. Just like lightning and wind, there is no real safe place outside from a storm. We mentioned lightning in a car is a good quick fix, but if there's tornadoes possible or wind, you really want to get into a shelter. Last ditch effort, no pun intended, is to get into a ditch. But even when we talk to school kids, we don't even want to bring that up, because you really should be paying attention so you're not caught off guard. What is the forecast? Are thunderstorms predicted? Stay closer to home, or know where you would want to go. So once you're inside, you want to be downstairs. I know we don't have basements, but a lower level away from windows, so not your second floor, not your attic, and you're putting as much around you as possible. This is something you think about today. This is not something to be afraid of, just like we do fire drills at school and things of that nature. You talk to your kids, you think about it today. My safe place is my pantry. So there's no guessing where we would need to go. And most of the time, we will not have to, heaven forbid, have a huge tornado come by. But if we have a warning, we need to go somewhere, we know where to go. So right on time. I like to try to be on time. We were told to present for about an hour, and I don't want to keep you any longer than you have to be. So we are at the hour, 57-minute point. So at this time,